The international adversaries the United States faces haven't changed much since the Cold War. While the technology has evolved, the unconventional war tactics they use have remained largely the same. Yet all of these nations have employed wars by other means, and the question remains of how the United States should respond. Special training programs in the U.S. military practice to face these types of threats, and among them is the Navy's Fighter Weapons School, known as Top Gun. To learn more, we speak with James Robb, former Top Gun Commander, retired Navy Admiral, and President of the National Training and Simulation Association. Hey, Jim Robb, thanks for being on Crossroads.
Glad to be here.
Now, Jim, right now, Russia is, of course, having its war in Ukraine. There's concern they might actually expand maybe into Poland, maybe into Hungary. There's a lot on the table. At the same time, the Chinese Communist Party is talking about war possibly with Taiwan, and even Iran is threatening war again. So, I understand when you were in Top Gun, it was kind of the same group of actors, mostly. Guess you had Iraq instead of Iran to an extent. You had the Contra War. But Russia, China, same basic threats. I'm curious, how have you seen this threat evolve over time?
Well, I think that the threat itself has evolved. So if you go take them independently, so say China back in 1994, when the first time I went there, they declared themselves a third world country. I mean, they were pretty far behind and they had aspirations, but they really didn't have a tremendous capability vis-a-vis the United States. If you look at Russia, we've always had this. I mean, I did 30 years of Cold War with Russia, and it was very much force on force, but in a deterrence kind of way. So we engaged them. I flew out and met them out in the middle of the ocean, and we danced around, the idea of what someone could do to the other country. And so that all played out sort of in an economic way, right? In terms of overspending, just they kind of came apart from inside.
That was the funny thing with the Cold War, actually. There was a huge economic point that people tend to not really realize that led partly to the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, it was really an economic thing. I mean, we actually overspent them. We spent them into a hole, and then they just couldn't recover. So that was the Reagan doctrine, and that was effective. Iran is another, sort of low. It has capability, but not. In fact, it has old F-14s that I used to fly. So it's, I think militarily not significant, but in the case of a nuclear threat, it's something you have to deal with, and they do have motivations to expand and take care of Israel and that sort of stuff. Another country is North Korea, which has played the game over time, mostly trying to up their game to try to have an intercontinental ballistic missile kind of approach. That's military side. If you look at the rest of the story, which I think you could start back with Russia and the Soviet Union with sort of outspending them to death. You have China, which has unleashed its own internal economy. So from 94 to 95, 96, when I was there, you could just see how the government had decided to bring Western economics into China to try and help the people help themselves, which it was terrible, in the early years. But it also had them have prosperity and then happiness and then growth. And then they ended up with an economy that just went crazy. So economically, they've afforded themselves the opportunity to go out and try to compete with us materially in the military world, which you've seen. They've also done extremely well at stealing our secrets.
Yeah, that's the other big point in that, yeah.
They've always been good at this, and they, will spend 7 or 8 years and, billions of dollars, and they'll steal the design, and they'll go off and replicate it and so they cut out all that money and time that we spent, and then they'll just steal it. They do this all the time. In fact, I flew Chinese MiG-21 knockoffs in the 80s. You know, they just taken a MiG-21 and knocked it off and turned it into an F-7, as they called it. It is what it is, and I think it is multi-domain, especially with China, because you see they have a real desire to be more influential around the world. And they've worked in the Panama Canal, they're drilling off the coast of Cuba. I mean, they have gone everywhere. They were in Iraq when we were in Iraq doing infrastructure. They have gone around because they need resources to try and make friends with folks that have resources. They need to import all this stuff. They've had fisticuffs with India because they worry about India as another hegemonic power. They're feeling their way out, and I think officially I would take them out of the third world country, into the first world, as of maybe the mid 2000s. They are now the pacing threat from a technology point of view with our military.
Now, going back to when you were, of course, in Top Gun, what kind of trainings were you doing preparing for the Russian threat? Because it seems like a lot of the Chinese strategies are based heavily on the Russian strategies, and really military capabilities of the U.S. then and Russian capabilities then are very similar to U.S. capabilities now, and almost where the Chinese are at. So it seems very similar. How you were preparing for this when you were in Top Gun? What were things like at the time?
Well, the Top Gun organization went out all over the world to sense the threat. So we were given great opportunities to go and actually watch the Soviets train on the radars, and we got sensors, and we developed a very good picture of how they were going to operate. Then we would bring those tactics and capabilities back to Top Gun, and we would bring them into our syllabus so that we were very much attuned to the Soviet threat. The same thing is happening on the Chinese side. We're collecting very good evidential kind of material on what the Chinese are doing. Additionally, we're also trying to identify how they're training, because training is a big deal. I mean, you can see that in terms of the Ukrainian execution at this point, where the Russians taking old Soviet equipment are not doing very well. And a lot of it's just bad training, bad organization, bad communications. If you take a look at Top Gun is all about training. It's all about finding out who the threat is, figuring out your capabilities, figuring out their weaknesses, and then employing tactics that actually counteract that. So, that's the name of the game for Top Gun, is just find out who the threat is and go make something good out of what they can't do.